Good afternoon. I'm Rachel Gerber, Denominational Minister for Christian Formation for Mennonite Church USA and the editor of The Gathering Place, which is an interactive website for Anabaptist youth leaders to learn, be, and connect. And you can join the Gathering Place community at www.thegatheringplace.us. Now, every month on The Gathering Place, we focus on a different theme, and everything we do hinges around that theme. And this month in November, we are talking about Overplayed, the busy lives of youth and families, and what are we going to do about it? It's the sort of that age-old conundrum of we oftentimes pit church versus youth group, and how does it all work out, and what does it mean to invite our families and invite our youth to live life to the fullest. And so to that extent, we've got so pleased that The Gathering Place is offering a webinar this month on Overplayed, which is from the same title of the book by Margot Starbuck and David King, called Overplayed, A Parent's Guide to Sanity in the World of Youth Sports. So welcome, Dave and Margot, to The Gathering Place. We're so excited to hear you share your wisdom for this group here, and thanks so much for being a part of this.
Well, thank you very much for having us, and my apologies for looking like I'm old school because I got the headsets on rather than the nice little things in your ears. I don't know if that says something about my age or my budget. I'm not sure which, but this is what the school provided for me. So I did get a hold of my son. He was invited to the gathering there at Newton. He said he had a funeral yesterday, a sermon to prepare for, and a wedding next Saturday. I am free to give him a hard time. So I will probably do that. No, it's great to be with you. Thank you so much for doing this. This is actually a bigger turnout than I think I've had at some of my other gatherings when people have gotten together. What we'd like to do today, and it's going to be a little harder maybe to do as much interactive, so I may have to call on people, and I'm teaching a class at Bluffton University by Zoom on Thursday nights in sports administration, so I'm accustomed to just calling on names. So I may have to call you by name because I'd like to get your feedback, mainly because, and some of you have already responded to it on the chat line to say why you're interested in this, but I would be interested in hearing, after I give some background information, to know what specifics are in your community. One of the things you'll find from our book is the fact that we are probably short on solutions for you as youth ministers or youth workers because of the fact that it has to be applicable to your own situation, whatever it is that you're experiencing. It probably will be the same, but I want to make sure it's appropriate for that. What we'd like to do, however, is to understand a little bit about the information we give you out of the book. I believe is intended to help you understand why parents are doing the things they are doing. And that may give you an opportunity then to speak into their lives and to challenge them. So I want to start, first of all, by giving you just a couple of background comments about why we wrote the book. And it's pretty simple. It comes down to about three things. One reason we didn't write the book was money. But we wrote it for three reasons, as I see. One is that I have been now in this athletic business for probably 35 to 38 years. And what I was seeing, I felt was hurting more than helping. Number two, no one from athletics, the profession of sports, and I don't mean professional sports, I mean those who work in athletic directing, high school coaching, middle school coaching, college, whatever, none of the books out there were from that perspective. They were from a parent, from a child psychologist, from a doctor, from a journalist who was looking into it. But no one was really writing from the athletic perspective. And the third reason that we wrote it was, and I should say no one from a faith perspective either had written anything about it. And the third reason was Margot and I were starting to hear a few more people who are willing to brazen and put out that question, do I really have to do this? Or why is this worth it, et cetera. So once we started hearing people asking that question, I felt like it was a good opportunity to do it. And the other reason is Menno Media just said, you have to do this. So because they felt the message was really important. The reason we chose the myth approach, and I credit Margot with this part of it, was that as we looked at it, I think we began to understand that or perceive that there really wasn't a lot of thinking going on. This was really reactionary. This would be stepping outside the building wherever you're at right now, and if there's a group of 15 people there looking up at the sky, what would you do? You'd look up at the sky. And so the invitations came home from school to sign up for this club or that club, baseball, soccer, basketball, gymnastics, dancing, whatever it was. And you didn't really ask a lot of questions. You just went in. And once you get in, it's really hard to get out in a good way that without hurting a lot of people. So I think the myth approach helps us, or should help us, to get a little bit better understanding and be able to challenge a parent when they say something back to you as a youth pastor, youth worker, or even a student, a kid who would come back and say something, because what we want to do is provide at least what I saw to be the other side of it. And so what we want to do is I want you to see this as a way in which you have more tools of understanding your parents and your kids within this, and then maybe that would help you to develop your own ways of challenging them or your own ways of responding to what they're doing. So that's what we see is giving you some tools, but we do want to also spend some time specifically with what can be. I don't think I'm as interested in changing the world or changing the youth culture. I'd like to give parents more tools and more opportunities to give a little bit greater sense of decision-making and maybe understanding why they're getting caught up in it. So that's a little bit of the background, and we're going to walk our way quickly through the myths, again, only to give you, here's what they're thinking, here's what we see as some of the reality, and we'll go back and forth with that a little bit. But that's the background piece to it. I think our book is filled with plenty of tips for parents. It doesn't have a lot of solutions for the larger organizations or for congregations as such. So I can't see everybody, but I'm going to start with Ashley. Ashley, can you unmute yourself and just tell us very briefly, how have you seen this impacting wherever you're working at?
Well, first, personally, I experienced it in my own life. I was, some would say, too involved in middle school and high school, and then I was a college athlete at Bluffton for 4 years. And I saw this specifically just with my teammates who had gone through travel sports since they were young. And some of those girls really didn't want to play in college, but they still felt that need from their parents. Their parents still wanted them to play. But I saw it different in every situation. And then now as a youth pastor, I experience this with my youth. It's with activities in school, but also with work and those activities. They just constantly deal with feeling like they need to do all of those things. And I think I just really liked I've read a lot about the subject just because that was my life, so I wanted to read about it. And so when I read your book, I just really enjoyed the fact that you didn't offer specific instructions, because it is going to be different for each and every situation. And so that's kind of where I come from.
Good. Thanks very much. Scott, I'd like to go to you because one of the stories that I left out of the book actually has something to do with youth conventions. Just to show you, when people ask me now, when I go out to speak about this, they say, what's the most absurd story you have about overbearing parents? And one that comes to my mind was 1 year, and I don't have all the details, and you don't even remember it, I'm sure, but we were working on the youth convention, which of course all of you are familiar, most of you are familiar with, and what goes into that. And I think it was probably in March or April of the year of the convention, we received an email or a phone call, I don't remember which it was, from a parent who wondered whether or not we could change the dates of the youth convention because it conflicted with a tournament that their son had signed up for. Um, so that one probably, I've got a few others I could share, but that one probably takes the cake. So I know, Scott, maybe you remember that at all. And I think you said you've just become a new youth worker, but share what you see happening in your particular situation.
Well, Dave, I do remember that call coming in, and we all laughed about it. But I'm kind of coming at this from a little bit from the convention perspective, because convention is just another thing in the middle of a busy summer. But I also coach high school volleyball, and so I get some of it from that perspective in terms of parents and talking to them about whether their child should participate in travel volleyball. And then as a youth sponsor, we get lucky, and we're actually in a more of a rural setting, and so a lot of our kids are involved in sports, but they haven't committed to the travel stuff yet. It's starting to creep up more with the younger ones, but the ones that are in high school right now are pretty dedicated to the youth group and don't like missing, but I'm anticipating conversations coming on, and so that's kind of why I'm here.
Thanks for that response. It's interesting because one of my first speaking engagements was at Clinton Frame in Indiana, and they were already they had me come out because they were facing it with volleyball, if I remember correctly, as traveling all over the place. So appreciate that. Maria, how about you? Can you give us just a little bit of your context and maybe a specific from your situation?
Sure, yeah. I'm really new. I've been in this position 3 weeks now, so I don't have a lot of experience to share. But coming in, I'm seeing that there are just not very many opportunities other than Sunday mornings for young people to engage with the faith community. And that's been a struggle, and I know the congregation has tried a number of different things, and they're being really creative, and it's fun to jump into the middle of that. But I'm kind of wondering too, I think we need to be able to share our lives if we're going to be passing on faith, and I'm wondering how that will happen. Our kids are from probably 4 or 5 different school districts, and often have to drive a ways to get to church. So that's a barrier as well. And yeah, so those are just some of my observations from the beginning.
Good, thank you. Maybe 1 or 2 more. Merle, do you want to give us a little bit of your context there, and maybe a specific that you've seen or how it's impacted your work situation?
First of all, thanks for doing this, Dave. I was at that Clinton Frame gathering, and it was I still remember a parent responding saying, but my kid needs me there. They would not know what to do if I wasn't there. And that really, they're good friends of ours. And so I think of this from a couple different perspectives, because I'm also a parent of an athlete. I've been youth ministry for a long time. And I'm also seeing this from the perspective of church attendance of all people, and how so much of their life, I mean, church attendance, their faith perspectives are held in the same as vacation, as going out with friends, that type of thing. And so when I think of busyness amongst kids, and I see it modeled by parents, and so that's where I come from is how do we help all ages work at this? And it's not something that's just creeping in now. It's something that has been going on for a lot of years. And then to answer questions of why should they be engaged with the church? Why should they be engaged with the youth group? That's something as a pastor, I have to keep grappling with as well. It's not just that we're trying to get them out of marching band, or trying to get them out of the sports and stuff, but we're trying to help them to follow Jesus and follow it faithfully. And so I guess and the last thing I'll just say is that I'm finding that it's not an easy answer, because for a lot of people, this is their world that they're in, and that's how they live out their faith. And so it's not so easy just saying stop doing that, but it's something that they take pretty seriously in their faith perspective sometimes too.
Thanks, Merle. I really appreciate that. And yeah, you 2 other comments I'll just make about that. And one of them is the horse is out of the barn. We're not going to change this real quickly. This is going to be here. And so now the question is, how do we navigate our way through it? And I want to make very clear also, Margot and I are not at all interested in trying to answer the question for you about, okay, should I go to youth group or should I go to volleyball practice?
Right.
That is not the question to be asked, in my opinion, because no one's going to win in that situation, and it's going to become more adversarial than it will be, and we'll explain ourselves why as to how we think we can navigate that. So thanks for that input. I know I didn't call on everybody, but it gives us a good say, and I'm going to just turn it over to Margot for a couple minutes just to give some introductory comments from her perspective as well. We got started in this project together in the sense that they asked her to come in and save me from my drowning in trying to write, and it didn't work. And so she came, and I would say that my trepidation when I started it was, gosh, is this going to be like, hey, would you type my term paper for me like I used to do all the time in college? And I don't know if she intended at the very beginning, but she certainly has embraced the issue and the subject, given the fact that she's got some of her own kids involved. And so she's not just the writer, she has partnered with me in this, and I'm deeply appreciative. And Margot, so they know what you sound like, et cetera, why don't you just make a couple comments maybe about even responding to the questions you've heard them, or the situations they've spoken about.
Yeah. Hey, friends. I'm ordained in the Presbyterian Church, also a mom of 3 athletes. My daughter's 17 and has played basketball, soccer, volleyball. Volleyball's her favorite. My middle son, Raleigh, plays baseball, and my youngest, Adi, plays soccer. And we've had a really good experience. Our family hasn't gotten sucked into the crazy. And I guess I'm a big believer that caring for our kids, we can say a no that is life-giving. And I think Dave and I are real interested in equipping families to begin by talking about what it is that they value and then making choices from those values. So if my family says, we want to be people who serve, we want to be people who are in community with others, that becomes the starting point, and then we're helping families make decisions from that. And I guess where I see the crush on families is in 2 ways: time and money. And I'm assuming that's exactly what you guys see too, just the time that's spent in the minivan, on the road, tournaments, and then also the dollars that families are spending. And we live with sort of this imagination that it's an investment that's going to somehow, even if it's not articulated, pay off in a college scholarship or something. And what I've learned from Dave is the facts show that's just not the case. You would be better off hiring a tutor or putting your money in the bank. Anyway, I care about families and kiddos and congregations. And Dave, do you want to start us off maybe on the myths?
Yep, I'd be happy to do that. We're going to take a couple of minutes here to run through the myths very quickly, just a couple of highlighted points to them, and hopefully you can draw something from them and maybe gain, again, a little bit better understanding. I think the first thing, and I'm sure you do this in your ministry, would be to try to make sure that you are putting yourself in the eyes of or in the life of the parents and how they're looking at it. The first one is entitled, "Because we owe our children every opportunity, we can't say no." And as Margot has already pointed out, a no, it's puzzling to me that we put all other kinds of limits on our children. Screen time, food, friendships over, who you're going to hang out with. There's just plenty of times at which we as adults, we take that approach because we think we know better for them. So the example I use is my oldest son, who's 6'9", 300 pounds, would eat a whole half gallon of ice cream at a sitting if he wanted to. I knew better and I didn't let him do it. Why are we as parents just saying yes to everything when it comes to sports, when we say no to other things along the way, and our children have lived through that no? Part of the reason, I think, is because we think sports are good, and they are. But what we have failed to do is to realize the overabundance and the overuse. we'd like to suggest that you know your child, not feel like you owe your child. And this couples then with, of course, parents being over involved with it because it's not their event anymore. It's not the child's event anymore. It's the parent's event. But we want to give parents the freedom to say, I have taken the approach throughout my life that I will not allow, and I know this sounds harsh, but I will simply not allow my kid's schedule to rule our family life. And if that means I don't attend, or if that means we say no to it. I certainly haven't done everything right by any means, but the freedom to say no has got to be, in my mind, brought back into the parent's life. And the pressure from everybody else doing it, the pressure from having my child left behind because they won't be involved in this, and we'll get to that one a little bit more. We just don't believe that you need to take that approach. But the myth is we've got to help our kids get ahead. Unfortunately, in our society, the worth and the value of me as a parent, as a father, is somehow based upon the success of my kids, or is reflected in the success of my kids athletically. I'm not sure where we got to this point where success in athletics of our children seems to be right up there with the American dream of the suburbia house with 2 cars and a dog and everything else like that. So the pressures are all around us to say, this is what you have to do, because if you want to be somebody, if you want to have something to talk around the water cooler, whatever it happens to be, that's why we can't say no to this. And we want to say, no, please get to know your child, not always have to owe your child. Margot, anything else? And then move us into the next one.
Yeah, I just want to say, I think that business of owing our children is a carryover from previous generations that's not as helpful today. My granddad was born in 1914, grew up during the Depression, and like when he was on his little paperboy route, his aunt would give him her pork chop for dinner so that he could eat. And so that generation has this understanding, I will sacrifice so that my child can do better than I did. But today, my children have never missed a pork chop, and they're so privileged. And I think we're looking at kids with so many opportunities and privileges, we have to pay attention to sort of the ludicrousy that we owe our children, just extravagance upon extravagance. And as a person of faith, as a mother of faith, I think that my obligation is not just to my own children, that they would get these opportunities, but my obligation is to the community of children in which I live. Some who can't get to sports because they can't afford to register, because their parent is working 2 shifts and can't get them there. So I think as we begin to think about it from a Christian perspective, we sort of broaden that idea of what we owe children to not just our own children, but to other children in the community as well. Second myth is that my child deserves to play with the most skilled athletes. So a little carryover from the first myth. But one of the things I learned from Dave is that a lot of learning happens when my child plays with athletes who aren't as skilled. Both, I would say, like technically, but also character development, as my child then participates in helping another one get a little bit better. I have a 9th grader, and he had a choice between 2 high schools, the big public high school where he may or may not make the awesome soccer team, and smaller school for the arts where he was certain not only to make the team, but to be a superstar. And, if we were gunning for that college scholarship, we might have sent him to the big public high school. But I'm thrilled that he's at sort of a little bit lower opportunity, but he's developing relationships with people on that team, and is having a great experience. So we just want to sort of bust open this myth that children have to be playing with the top level of skill, which I'll say in elite sports, because it's about the dollars, people who can pay for those opportunities actually may or may not even be the best of the best of the best. But I'll let Dave chime in.
Good. Thanks, Margot. Yeah, this myth gets coupled with a couple of other things that are out there that play into it. When we say that we have to be with the most skilled athletes, that right away moves us into the elite travel teams. And the point is, yes, I will give you the fact that when you play against better skilled players, you may develop. One thing I forgot to say this as sort of a preface. Our major concern is between ages 3, well, actually 10 months, actually. Our major concern is between ages 3 and 16. When you get into the junior and senior year of high school and into college, you do have to play with these better elite teams. I will give you that. I would expect that. I don't think there's hardly anybody who can play at a collegiate level who hasn't been involved in some of those. The concern comes, so our concern, these myths are actually addressed towards your 9, 10, 11-year-old, your 4, 5, 6-year-old. And in this case, so you couple this, no, you don't have to be with the best skilled athletes that early in your lifetime, in your sports career. So, and then if you say you have to be, now you're caught up into the major money. And the reality is, as you'll see later, these teams on the elite and travel are not at all about skill development. They are about exposing your son or daughter to some other, or either to get a bigger prize or to some other college or something like that. And I'll prove that to you in a little bit as we get to one of the other myths. So yes, you do get better when you play with other people that are better than you. But the reality is the situation you have to join to do that is what becomes detrimental. Probably the myth that I spend the most time with and aggravates me the most is the one about that my child should specialize in one sport, because all of the studies and all of the experience show that it just simply isn't true. But we can't seem to get that through. Talk to any college coach and they will tell you what they are looking for in the student athletes they recruit are someone who played multiple sports. So if the college coaches, which is the dream of the parent and the kid, if they are saying, I want somebody that plays multiple sports, why are you keeping them in one sport? To me, it just doesn't make sense. And the overuse injury is just phenomenal. There are books out there, there are studies out there that our bodies were not made to do one motion in the developmental stage during a particular growth period in our life. And yet, we will play one sport year round. So not only might we damage the possibility of us getting to that goal that we wanted to because of an injury, we also may not even come close to that goal because we're one-dimensional and we haven't really developed. My second son, who was a basketball player, would have been a much better basketball player had he played volleyball. I won't get into why he didn't play volleyball and all that, but the point is that the specialization, and we are so afraid that we'll get behind. So, but there is no way, and again, I know I can become a kind of arrogant and stubborn in my old age, but there's just no way that you can convince me or possibly convince any other coach that if your 9-year-old is playing soccer in the fall and then signs up for this indoor soccer during the winter, in which they go one night a week for 6 weeks, there's no way you can tell me and prove to me that they actually become a better soccer player by doing that 6 nights, 1 hour a week for 6 nights. What else could they have been doing had they been playing basketball, volleyball, ice hockey, something like that? The specialization is beyond control in terms of the pressure that's there. And I haven't even mentioned the money that comes involved. But the burnout factor comes when you specialize too early, because when you specialize too early, you may not pick up on the one that you really enjoy later on and become better at. So that one and that one will be tied into another one as we get in here. But let me say one more thing about, well, no, I'll stop there and let's jump back to Margot. And again, keep your chats coming in. We're going to work through these and then come back for general discussion. We'll be done here in just a couple of minutes, but you may chat in if you want to. But jump us to the next one about no harm in participating.
Yep. Just before we jump, I want to emphasize that multi-sport athletes are developing these competencies that actually feed back into their sport of choice. So my daughter is a better volleyball player because she played basketball, soccer. That's muscles. That's thinking about strategy. It's just such a win when kids are playing more than one sport. And Dave mentioned burnout. Kids who start playing a sport at age 8, by the time they're 13, 70% of those have dropped out. And I see it in families, like kids who go hard soccer. And by the time they're 13, the kid doesn't even enjoy the sport anymore. So the earlier kids are starting, we're seeing a lot of burnout and dropout. And there is a time when it's good to specialize. And as Dave mentioned, that's sort of older high school years. The fourth myth is that there's no harm in participating. And I understand this logic because in my household, anytime a child is not on a screen, it feels like a big win. Like if I see hear somebody walk downstairs and get a bowl of cereal, I'm like, well, there's some exercise. They're not on a screen for 2 minutes. And there can be harm for children in participating in sports. There was a study done about psychological harm, and 75% of young adults surveyed reported psychological harm, that they felt diminished by their coaches, by parents. That's really, really alarming. When our book came out, several young adults said to me, I wish my parents had read this. And both of these in their early to mid 20s had these overuse injuries that they will live with for the rest of their lives because they were pushed so hard as young people. So there can be psychological harm, there can be physical harm. 50% of high school sports injuries are overuse injuries. And I read someplace that 50% of those could be prevented. By my math, 100% of those can be prevented by making better choices that benefit our children. None of them need to have overuse injuries. So there's psychological, physical, burnout. Dave, what do you want to add?
Well, I'm going to go back to what Merle had mentioned, talking about this transference of values. And so one of the things we suggest, and I know this is a pretty heavy exercise if your kid's 3 years old and 4 years old, but to sit down and to say, what is it that we really value? And Merle, you're absolutely right. The parents are transferring this message to them clearly that church isn't important. And it's not just sports, but it's other things that are doing that. So we really encourage people to sit down, put out 3 or 4 things that you really value, put them up on the refrigerator, and then your decisions are based upon that. One of the things that we want parents to be able to do, and grandparents, whatever it is, to step back and to get the bigger picture. The bigger picture is really hard for us to grab a hold of. And we say, well, there's no harm in just jumping in. We'll do this one right here. We'll do it for this season. We'll do it for that season. Then it just keeps adding and adding and adding on. And you can go on and on. You've all sat at games or heard games where the way the coach responds to the officials, the way your parents respond to the officials, the way that there's all the interactions that are going on, are those really positive values? How do we value the kid that is not playing very well, that's picking posies in the right field, and everybody starts getting on their case? This bigger picture, the longer term view, is what really has to happen. And if you really stop and think about it, if parents would sit down, because every time that I listen to a set of parents or anybody tell me about, well, you should have seen this incident that happened the other night, like da-da-da-da-da. And I want to just stop and say, okay, what did the kids see out of this? And is that the same value that you wanted to transfer onto them?
Dave, I want to jump in with one thing. Value for youth workers, value for children. As you're interacting with young people, I feel like in your relationship, you can empower them to have these conversations with their parents if the parents aren't initiating them. There was a high school girl who begged the coach during tryouts to cut her from the lacrosse team, begged him to cut her. Her parents had been dragging her around for years playing lacrosse. She didn't want to. She was afraid to tell her parents. And I see that as a great place where relationships within the church, you can empower that child to have the courage to let their parent know either they're done, they want less. Anyway, yay church.
Good. Let's jump to good parents attend all of their children's games. This is probably behind specialized in sport. This is probably the one that tips the scale a lot. And I'm just going to say a couple of comments about it. One is I agree that someone made the comment earlier that the kids really want the parents there. Make sure you, again, go back, know your child. Are you sure they do? Because even if you're sitting there saying, come on, you can do it. I know you can do it, Johnny. You're encouraging. The child may feel it more pressure. And so be careful about that. The parent has now taken over the entire event and it has become theirs. Just watch the parents and you see that. My concern, or our concern, is what relationship is being developed between parent and child. Is it based on performance, or is it based on value as an individual, as a person who, whatever it is that they want to do? I'll make one comment for grandparents. Recognize the fact that sometimes grandparents will hear more from the kids than what the parents will, because it's a safer zone to say, boy, that really hurt me, or I'm not sure I want to go to practice tomorrow, or something like that. So we have a lot of tips in there for parents, because parents blow this every time. And the issue is, if you talk about it, it's your perspective and you never get a chance to hear the kid's perspective. So as Margot says, zip your lip when you get in the van on the way home. Because and that's why my contention, and some of you have heard me say this before, is pick out 2 games you're not going to go to. Tell your son you're not going to go to those games, and take your wife or your spouse out to do something else. The interesting thing that will happen is when you ask your child about the game, it will be the first time you have ever heard their perspective. And their perspective is going to be very different than what yours was. Yours is going to be result-oriented, performance-oriented, and theirs is going to most likely at age 3 and 4 are going to be about the grass, the color of the socks, and the friends that they played with. So parents, you have got to step back. You've got to make this theirs, and you've got to find ways to step aside and challenge yourself to just sit there and not say anything, or to somehow let them do it. Margot, make a couple of comments and lead us into the last one, and then we'll open up for some discussion.
Just peeking at Rachel's comment that they asked their son how he wanted them to respond and cheer on the sidelines, and his answer was nothing, be quiet. And I love asking the kid, like, as Dave and I were growing up as athletes, his dad never came to his games, and he feels like he did pretty okay. My mom tells me she was at all of them, and I don't remember her being at one. So that was a reminder to me to check in with my own kiddos and see what works for them. Dave, I think we skipped one. One of the myths we skipped was youth sports instill our families' values. Okay. And again, I think that might be a carryover. Like, we assume that youth sports means discipline, teamwork, and that can be in there. But I think we also know that there are some ugly values that can go along with it. That winning is more important than relationships, unsportsmanlike attitudes, playing through the pain, sort of a machismo. There's lots of values that I don't want my kids picking up from youth sports. And when I sat down to say, okay, what are the ones that I do want them to be picking up? That really did sort of help me then know how to function. And for me, those include exercise, time with family, and maybe that's organized sports, but maybe that's my kids in the backyard, friendships, relationships, sportsmanship, teamwork. I want them to learn how to respect a coach. I'll say being benched. When my daughter was benched, I saw her bringing cups of cold water to the starting basketball players during timeout. And that'll be my favorite sports memory when my kids grow up of my daughter. And you know what? I try to communicate that to them. And I think as youth workers, you guys can do that too. And just on the last one, that parents don't have to be at all the games, I'll say this. The games where youth staff, volunteers have showed up to be there for my kiddos amazing. Like, that's how my kids know that they matter to the church and the church cares about them. It's also fun to hang out with them in the stands, but that's like just a great intersection, I think, to care for your families. And our last one is the money we've invested in youth sports will pay off. Like, if your child is, I don't know, Kevin Durant, maybe it'll pay off. But for most of us, it's just not the case. Okay, of high school athletes, 3% of high school athletes go on to play in college. Of those, only 1% get scholarships. Dave, did I say it right?
You got it right.
Okay, it's just a very slim percentage, like the dollars aren't there. And I think we can even have those conversations at church and with families just to get people a little more realistic.
Right. The final thing I'm going to mention about the investment, so that, again, going back to this, when you go to play travel baseball, you have to understand that the investment is not about getting better. You could get a lot better if you're playing baseball and you travel to North Carolina from Virginia to play in a weekend tournament. You're going to play 4 games. You're going to get 16 at bats, and you might get to field the ball maybe 6 times in the whole weekend. Meantime, you've spent $1,000 traveling Hampton Inns, the whole 9 yards. There just is nothing about the extreme travel team that eludes, that gives off skill development. It's all about prestige. It's all about vision. It's all about who you are seen by. So that, and again, I'm not even going to get into the scholarship piece and all of that. We don't want to get into that. Well, we've covered way more than what we probably needed to, and we want to give some time for some conversation or action. I think we've pretty well got it on to, I think we have most everything from questions that have come in. Now's your opportunity. Maybe you want to, I know you don't like to walk over top of everybody, but we'd be open to some questions as you're thinking about that. If you haven't, again, I really like your idea, Margot, of, and I know this sounds counter to what you want to do, but how can we as youth workers, rather than see it as as something we have to go against, how can we embrace it? And if we go to embrace it by going there to that, how can you pull out the experiences that the kids are having in sports? Because maybe that is really where they grow. Part of the reason that I got into this is the situation, the story that I tell. When I was in 7th grade, I failed the math test, and the teacher put the paper upside down on my desk, which they always do. I turned it over very quickly, and I saw the big red F, and I quickly folded and put it in my textbook, and nobody knew at all that I failed. And that afternoon, when I was playing for the basketball team in 7th grade, I got fouled with no time left on the clock, and we were down by 1, and I promptly missed both foul shots. Now, that one I couldn't hide. So now I had to learn. I learned an awful lot about myself. How do I respond? I had to learn about how the coach responds. How do the fans, how am I treated the next day at school? If we can help young people and families understand what is it that you can learn from this experience and pull that out of them. We try to get our athletes here at EMU to take their athletic experiences and place it into the discussions in classes, to place it into their essays that they're writing if the topic is appropriate. So if youth workers can embrace it and see it as a way to foster spiritual growth, then maybe they can begin to incorporate and come back and some of that. So I would really encourage you to see it as a way to embrace and a way to ask more about it, which I'm sure you already do. Rachel, I'm sure we're getting close to that end and everybody wants to leave. We got about 10 minutes, I think. And so we have more to say, but we'd rather hear a little bit from you, maybe a question or two. And I know you don't like to go over each other, but if you're on screen, maybe wave your hand and we can know who's coming on.
Absolutely. Who wants to get started? What kind of comments, questions do you have about this discussion?
I just really appreciated the discussion on priorities, because that's something that we've struggled with as a church, and we spent a lot of time talking about with our youth workers, because they've noticed that kids have so much going on that they just don't show up. And even when two of our youth sponsors are actually a little older than I am, and their youth group experience and the youth group experience now is very different. It's because there's so many activities and so many priorities. And so I appreciated the discussion of, talking with families and sitting down and saying, okay, how do our values and what we think is important, how does that match up with what we ask our kids to do? Because I'm seeing that a lot even with our elementary age kids, and I'll have parents that will give me a litany of things that they have to run their kids to. And so I just appreciated hearing that, and I think it provides some good open some good discussions. So
well, thanks, and that's one of the things that I think we have to use. I use a lot of the terms priorities and purposes, and that's what I think you have to have parents. Why are we doing it? What is the purpose we're trying to get? And Merle already mentioned this. This goes beyond the whole youth sports thing. This is, am I vacationing over the Sunday or not? And how am I doing that? So all of us, I think, are called upon, and maybe we have to rethink church. What does church look like? I'm sure Merle and the rest of you are always asking those questions. Scott does it in terms of, is this convention, is that church? How do we do that? But I would say, I would use terms like, and again, they don't like to see this. The other reason that we did write the book is because we also know that they're not going to listen to you because you're paid to say, hey guys, you're supposed to be in church. We're not paid to say that. So maybe if they hear it from an athletic realm that says, you know what, you'd probably be better off. And the one phrase I use that some people have picked up on, we have to keep telling parents that their children will be people a lot longer than they will be athletes. And so maybe whatever it can be done, that doesn't mean you don't participate. I want to hear you folks to hear me very clearly. I want kids to participate in sports. But when the priorities are so out of whack that it controls our lives and the purposes are not centered with what's best for the child, that's where we come off of. And so we've bought into a system. And once you get into the system, it's very difficult to get out. So terms like priorities and purposes, I think, are where you have to start to challenge the families, whether it be sports or whether it be anything else. And are we using all of our experiences to grow? Great question, great comment. Thank you.
I just want to say one of the things I think families can do to justify it is say, well, this is my mission field, right? I'm with these families that aren't Christians. And, a very narrow way of thinking about that is asking the parent on the bleacher next to me, like, do you know Jesus? But because I know what my family's values are, that actually can become a place to put into practice a wider spectrum of values, which is, okay, so some goofy coach at school decides that every child needs $125 worth of like athletic swag. This isn't the uniform, just swag to like wear around the school. And boy, there's a lot of kiddos on my son's team who can't afford that. And although I think it's ridiculous and not what I would want to spend my time on, I want to encourage Christian families, like, slide the coach some money for the boys on the team who could not afford that. Or a few months ago, an opposing team we were playing was making racist comments like on the field that the officials didn't hear. And boy, like, that's when I want my son asking, like, what would Jesus do in this situation? So I think if families are going to be committing themselves to athletics, then you can equip them to see and find new ways that they can put their values into practice on the field, on the courts.
Also, don't let parents tell you that this is a family event. I've heard that quite a bit. This is family time. That is the furthest thing from family time in my mind, and I'm pretty harsh about it when I talk to parents, because it's three people watching one run around. And so it's not family time. And my counsel is always skip that particular time and work in the soup kitchen or something like that. one of the comment, again, these are sort of random now, but I'm trying to throw them in here. One of the things you want to make sure parents try to understand is that a lot of what we do in youth sports at the lower levels is developmentally inappropriate. It's like giving a fourth grader a calculus problem. You wouldn't do that. So why do you put a 4-year-old on a soccer field with the same size ball, same goal, same everything else? It just isn't developmentally appropriate. Any teacher will tell you that students at age 5, 6, 7, 8, whatever it is, don't have spatial awareness developed yet, and yet we put them on a soccer field and tell them to spread out. It makes no sense. We give big trophies to people at age 4, 5, or 6, or 7. So we have these large trophies, and the sports psychologist, or I mean, a child psychologist will tell you that when you introduce extrinsic values like new uniforms, swag, and trophies, they don't develop the internal values and the intrinsic values, which is what a coach wants, because I want to play for the sake of playing, not for the sake of being there so my mom can cheer, I don't want to play because I want to play because I love the game and I love the people I'm doing. But if we start introducing all this external stuff, which is staying at the Hampton Inn, swimming in the swimming pool, and bringing home a big trophy, pretty soon they no longer want to play. And when you take that away and they get to college and there's only 25 people here to see their game, they don't know why they're playing anymore. So the other reason I wrote the book is when I got to the college level, I thought, oh my gosh, I'm seeing the results now. I've got people quitting all the time. I've got people that don't know how to practice. I've got people that walk in here entitlement. What's this all about? Oh yeah, I forgot. They were on this elite, select, premier state team. Sorry, you got me going. Next question or comment.
I've got one.
Go ahead.
You had said earlier, and this is somewhat on the same topic, and you said, should I go to football or should I go to youth group? Is a bad question. It's a lose-lose situation. You said you'd say more about that.
Oh yeah, no, thanks for bringing that up. The reason I say it is because when you're trying to make that decision should have been made a long time ago. That decision should have been made when the schedule first came out. So I encourage parents, if they're going to sign up for this, 2 things. Number one, when you find out something about the league, it's pretty easy in a smaller community or any kind of community to find out, are the coaches certified? Are they trained? You can kind of tell, you can find out where the politics are if you ask enough questions, and you can find out who the good people and who the bad people are within youth sports. And then my contention is once you get that schedule, then you sit down with your child and you look at your family and church's schedule, and then you go back to the coach and you say, Coach, thank you very much. I'm honored that you want my son or my daughter to play for your team. We've looked over the schedule of the team, and we've looked over our own schedule, and here are the 3 times when we are not going to be able to be at your event, whether it be a practice or a game. And that decision was made beforehand. So that's what I meant by making it beforehand, because if you try to make it on Sunday morning, hey, are you guys going to be here Wednesday night? Well, I don't know. I've got this and I've got that and the other thing. It doesn't solve it all. But if you make those decisions ahead of time, to me, then it doesn't always come down to that. So that was my reference in there, is that you can argue the value of the Sunday school thing or church youth group thing, and the parents can argue the value, and both of them are correct. So that's my point, that you don't get anywhere. And my hope would be that maybe if the decision's made ahead of time, number one, we don't face that, and number two, then everybody feels, and they could do the same to a youth group. Hey, we're not going to be able to do this because we are playing in this blah 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 or whatever. That was my
I just
thought.
want to add, Dave's talking about doing that for time, and the same goes for dollars. At the beginning of the summer, I might say to my middle schooler, you have 400 sports dollars this summer. Are you going to do one fancy weekend? Or are you going to do 2 week-long camps? So same thing about money. Families decide ahead of time what they're going to spend, and then it's less likely to get out of control if you've done that ahead of time.
Do we have time for one more comment? Or Dave and Margot, do you have any final thoughts?
Well, we'll wait a minute see if there's a question or a comment, and then we'll make some. Looks like we've solved the whole thing for everybody. There's no easy answer. Margot, why don't you go ahead then, Rachel, if you'd like us to wrap it up here. I'll let Margot have a few words and then I'll wrap it up for us.
I don't have a ton of words to say, but again,
when has that ever happened?
I would love to see, as you know, I would love to see families be equipped to implement the values of Jesus into the decisions that they're making about youth sports. And so that does have to do with privilege and power and money and all of those things. It's not a way that we've been thinking about opportunities for our kids. And so I would just love to see parents given sort of a fresh framework for thinking about the choices they're making.
Thanks, Margot. And one of the reasons, as you said, we did start to write this book is because there were more people who were starting to ask the questions about it. I think a lot of it comes down to I think that you can easily put this into the same category of being conformed to the world and the patterns of the world instead of being transformed. And if you follow that verse through, transformed by your minds, to me that says we're not thinking. We're simply acting upon a dream or a wish, or I don't want to it's an emotion. And I'd like parents to be challenged to say, think about that bigger picture and who my son or daughter, again, I'm not going to try to make a spiritual lesson out of spilled milk and whatever, rotten apples, whatever it is. Not every event has to be done that way. But if you can think about what happens, what are the messages you're sending when they are 5 and 6 and 7 and 8, and does this really add to who they're going to be? So do it with your mind. Think through why you're doing this. Part of the challenge comes is you as a parent, I believe, need to make the decision when they are 3 years old, 4 years old, and 5 year old. And at what point do you start engaging them in that conversation and start to say, here's how much it's going to cost us this summer. We're not going to do this. But I believe that we have been caught up into a pattern of the world that we just don't question. And I think and we're acting on emotion. We're acting on our own desires. I know that sounds awful, but I think God calls us to be transformed by our minds. So I would challenge you to challenge parents to say, can we sit down and think about this? One of the first things I've said to many people is, I really encourage you to create a safe space for your parents to deal with this together. Mm-hmm. This is really a challenge for them to ask that question. And it's tough to say no to your kid or to face, now I've got to make that decision. If your church, your congregation can provide some space in which this question can be asked and it can be dialogued in a healthy way rather than feeling like it's a church saying you got to do this sort of thing, I would really encourage that. Sunday school class, elective, whatever it happens to be, I think you're going to find there's going to be some people who would really, because it doesn't have to be all or nothing. It's just a matter of some kind of balance that we have in what we're doing is what I would encourage you to do. So if you enter it that way, that's why I say I want people to understand, I want kids to play sports. So I'm not hitting people over the head and say, you got to stop, you can't do it, you can't do that. Start to rein in some balance. Transform your mind as to what you're actually doing and what's actually happening and what's better for your child. And I think the Spirit then can lead you into the decisions that you need to make.
Well, I don't know if we could wrap it up any better than that. Thank you so much to both of you for taking this time and offering us such wisdom about how to, continue to navigate the world of sports and activities with our families. So we're so grateful. And thank you to each of you for taking an hour here out of your afternoon to join the Gathering Place. Next month, Anna Groff will be offering a webinar about how to keep our congregations safe from sexual abuse. And so feel free to come back next month for that one. So another important topic. So blessings to all of you. And until then, peace.
Thanks, Rachel.